Good evening, and welcome to News of the World. It's Wednesday, July 15th. Tonight, we drift slowly across 28 countries, from Kuwait to Grenada. There's nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Settle in, and let the world turn. Kuwait has found itself, these past weeks, in the path of a war it did not start. Iranian strikes have reached its territory, hitting a Kuwaiti naval vessel and injuring 4 service members. Kuwait's military confirmed the attack and said its air defenses were responding. Reports described large explosions, and by the accounts gathered, these were the most serious strikes on Kuwaiti soil since an attack on the country's airport in June. There is another layer here, and it matters. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has claimed that its targets included American military assets stationed in Kuwait, weapons and drones, they say, at bases on Kuwaiti ground. That claim sits at the heart of what's happening. Kuwait hosts American forces, and in a region where the Iran war has widened, that presence makes Kuwait a target in ways its own people never chose. The Gulf International Forum observes that the Iran war is rewriting Kuwait's defense architecture, a quiet phrase for a profound shift. A country that has long relied on alliances and diplomacy is now thinking harder about shields and interceptors, about what it can defend and from whom. 4 service members were hurt. That is the human measure of this story, and it is worth holding. Kuwait is not a battlefield, and no one there wants it to become one. But the sound of air defenses and the knowledge of what they're defending against is something the country is learning to live with, a difficult education, arrived at unwillingly, in the dark. Samoa, out in the blue heart of the Pacific, is putting real resources into the invisible threads that hold its islands together. The telecommunications company Digicel Samoa has committed $22 million to expand its mobile network across the country. For a nation spread across 2 main islands, mobile connectivity isn't a luxury. It's how families stay in touch across villages, how businesses reach customers, how news travels when the road runs out. An investment like this touches daily life in ways that don't always make headlines but settle deep into the rhythm of a place. The expansion means broader coverage, and the hope is a sturdier signal for people who've learned to plan around the gaps. In the Pacific, where distance is measured in ocean as much as in kilometers, a reliable connection can feel like a bridge thrown across the water. Digicel has been operating in Samoa for years now, part of a wider Pacific presence that has reshaped how these island nations communicate. This latest investment suggests the company sees a future here, not just customers to be served, but communities to be kept in reach. And on a warm evening in Apia, with the reef just visible past the harbor lights, that's a quiet kind of progress. The kind that doesn't announce itself but shows up. Instead, in a call that goes through, a message that lands, a voice from the next village arriving clear and whole. Colombia's peace process, the long, hard-won agreement that aimed to end decades of conflict, is facing a fragile moment, and the people who have spent years protecting it are looking beyond their borders for help. Colombian advocacy groups have turned to the United Nations, asking the international community to help safeguard a peace they fear is at risk. The concern is specific. The country's president-elect, Abelardo de la Espriella, has announced plans to close Colombia's peace and human rights offices, the very institutions meant to carry forward the work of reconciliation and accountability. For a country that has lived through generations of violence, these offices were never just bureaucratic. They were a promise, however imperfect, that the past would not be forgotten and that those most affected would not be abandoned. The incoming administration is charting a different course: conservative leadership, free market priorities, closer ties with Washington. In the United States, senators from both sides have urged the new administration and its partners to publicly affirm support for Colombia's democratic transition. That matters in its way. But tonight, the quieter story is the one being carried to the UN. It's the story of communities and advocates who have seen peace slip before and who refuse to let it happen quietly. They are asking the world to pay attention, not to take sides in an election, but to remember what was won and what could still be lost. Oman has awarded what's being called the largest pumped storage hydro project in the Middle East. The idea behind pumped storage is elegantly simple. When demand for electricity is low, water is pumped uphill to a reservoir. When demand rises, that water flows back down through turbines, generating power. It's storage, really. Energy set aside for when it's needed most. In a region where the sun blazes and the wind blows hard, but neither does so on schedule, that kind of storage matters. And for Oman, a country that has spent recent months urging its neighbors toward a new security order for the Gulf, building something this large and this patient feels true to character. These have not been easy waters. Tankers have been struck off this coast, seafarers have been hurt, and some remain missing. Oman's foreign minister has called the wider moment a disaster, urging calm where others reach for harder words. Through all of it, Oman has kept its voice low and its hand extended. So this project, quiet, forward-looking, built to endure, fits. It's not the story that shouts, it's the one that lasts. Energy stored against an uncertain future, in a country that has made a habit of preparing for tomorrow, without making a fuss about it. Portugal has been thinking about artificial intelligence in a way that's quietly its own. The country's Amalia initiative approaches AI not as a private race for advantage, but as something closer to a public good, a shared resource meant to serve the many, not just the few. That framing is worth sitting with. In much of the world, the conversation around AI moves fast, driven by competition and commerce. Portugal seems to be asking a different, slower question. Not only what can this technology do, but who does it belong to, and who should it answer to? For a country that has long valued public life, the cafe, the square, the shared afternoon, treating AI as a commons fits an older instinct. It suggests that even something as vast and new as machine intelligence should be shaped by the same democratic logic that governs a park or a school. Access matters, accountability matters. The people affected should have a say. The details of Amalia remain modest in the telling, and perhaps that's right. The story here isn't a grand announcement. It's a posture, a small country choosing to hold something powerful in common, rather than letting it concentrate where power usually does. If you're still with me, let that settle for a moment. Somewhere in Europe's southwest corner, they're deciding that the future, like the past, is something best shared. Timor-Leste sits at the edge of the Pacific and the Indian Oceans, a young nation on a rugged island where the land meets the sea with particular intensity. These days, the people here are working to build resilience at the front line of climate, disasters, and food insecurity, a quiet, steady effort that doesn't often make headlines beyond its borders, but shapes daily life in ways both large and small. The country knows what it means to face the elements. Seasonal storms, shifting rainfall, and the slow pressure of a changing climate press on communities that have long lived close to the land. Farming families feel it in the harvest. Coastal villages feel it in the tides. And the question of food, whether there will be enough, whether it will reach the places that need it, is never far from the conversation. What's happening here isn't a single dramatic event. It's the patient work of preparation, of strengthening what can be strengthened before the next storm arrives, of finding ways to feed communities through the hard months, of building systems that bend without breaking. International partners are present, offering support through programs that reach into districts and villages. If you're still with me, picture a place where resilience isn't a buzzword but a daily practice, where people who have weathered much continue to build something that lasts. The night settles over the hills and the coast, and the work goes on, quietly, steadily, the way it does in so many places the world tends to overlook. In Canada, something quietly remarkable is taking shape along the Pacific coast. LNG Canada, the large liquefied natural gas project in British Columbia, has offered 5 First Nations the chance to invest up to $1 billion Canadian in its second phase, specifically in a new storage tank. That's not a small gesture. It's an invitation to own a piece of the infrastructure rising on land these nations have called home for millennia. For years, big energy projects in Canada have been flashpoints, tension between economic ambition and Indigenous rights, between provinces and Ottawa, between what's built and who it's built for. This offer doesn't erase that history. Nothing does. But it does suggest a shift in how the conversation happens. Not consultation as a formality, but partnership with real financial weight behind it. $1 billion is a door opening, and 5 nations will decide for themselves whether to walk through. That decision is theirs, and it won't be simple. Investment carries risk, and saying yes means tying your future, in some measure, to a fossil fuel project in a warming world. Saying no means letting that door close. Either way, the choice rests where it should, with the people whose territory is at stake. And if you're still with me, that might be the part worth holding tonight. Not the scale of the money or the engineering of the tank, just the fact that in a corner of Canada, the question of who gets to build and who gets to belong to what's built is being asked a little differently. Switzerland has long been a country that does much of its quiet work behind closed doors, in banking rooms, in legal chambers, in the meticulous back and forth of negotiation. So it feels fitting that this week, the story from Bern is about exactly that kind of work. A landmark trade agreement with the United Kingdom, focused on the services sector that sits at the heart of the Swiss economy. For a country that isn't part of the European Union, but sits surrounded by it, Switzerland has always had to build its trade relationships one by one, carefully, like a watchmaker fitting gears. This deal with the UK matters because services, finance, insurance, professional consulting are where Switzerland's real economic weight lies. Not in chocolate or mountains, though those get the postcards, but in the invisible machinery of expertise that crosses borders every day. The agreement is being called landmark, and that word gets used too often. But here it seems to mean something specific, a recognition that after Britain left the EU, both countries needed to rebuild bridges that had stood for decades without anyone thinking much about them. Now they have. If you're still with me, you might wonder why this matters beyond Geneva and London. It matters because in a world that has spent recent years pulling apart agreements, 2 countries have just sat down and made a new one, quietly.
The way Switzerland often does its best work, not with fanfare, but with patience, and with an eye on the long horizon.
Luxembourg has been quietly tending to its startup ecosystem, taking what's described as another important step toward making the country a more welcoming place for new ventures. It's easy to forget, when you picture Luxembourg, that there's more to the story than banking and finance. This is one of Europe's smallest sovereign states, a grand duchy tucked between Belgium, France, and Germany, and it has been working steadily to broaden its economy beyond its financial heart. The latest move, noted by the law firm White & Case, signals continued attention to the conditions that help young companies take root and grow. There's a patience to it. Startup ecosystems don't bloom overnight, and Luxembourg seems to understand that. The country has the advantage of being multilingual, well-connected, and politically stable qualities that matter when you're trying to convince an entrepreneur to build something from scratch within your borders. Around the same time, there are other signs of quiet momentum: a defense materials program spanning 8 years, new legal frameworks for managed securitizations, even healthcare workforce initiatives reaching into neighboring Belgium. Each one is modest on its own, but together they sketch a country that keeps adjusting the soil. If you're still with me, picture Luxembourg at dusk, the old fortifications lit softly, the business districts across the river still humming. Somewhere in there, a few people are sitting in small offices, building something that didn't exist before, and the country, for its part, is making room. San Marino, the small republic set in the hills of northern Italy, has been quietly working through a legal tangle that reaches all the way to Bulgaria. A court there has revoked a seizure order connected to what's being called the Bulgarian bank heist case, a matter involving disputed funds that had been frozen. The decision is a step toward resolution, though it's a partial one. Only some of the money has been released so far, and the rest remains held while the proceedings continue. For a country this small, San Marino carries its share of international legal complexity. It's a place known for its banking sector and its long history of independence, one of the oldest republics in the world by its own tradition. Cases like this one, with threads crossing borders, are part of the quiet work that keeps a small state connected to the wider financial world. The details of the case remain limited, but the court's decision suggests a careful weighing, not a sweeping dismissal, and not a full release. Somewhere in that middle ground, the law does its slow work. If you're still with me, it's worth remembering that for all the attention grander courts attract, a small republic's judges handle questions just as intricate, just as consequential to the people involved. The funds, the filings, the patience required, they'll keep moving through San Marino's courts at their own pace, and the night will hold steady while they do. Morocco has long kept its own counsel when it comes to the wider world, and these days that world seems to be coming to Rabat. The French Prime Minister is traveling to the Moroccan capital to cement a renewed alliance between the two countries, a relationship that stretches back generations, through periods of closeness and periods of distance alike. France and Morocco share deep ties of language, trade, and family, and when those ties fray, both sides tend to feel it. So the visit carries the quiet weight of consolidation, of two governments choosing to sit across from one another and affirm, again, that the partnership matters. What comes of it will unfold in the weeks and months ahead, in agreements signed and conversations continued. But for now, in Rabat, there is the simple gesture of arrival, one leader making the journey, the other waiting to receive. Diplomacy, at its best, is not dramatic. It is people in rooms, talking carefully, trying to get the measure of each other's intentions. And Morocco, as it often does, receives its guests with the patience of a country that knows its own value and does not need to rush. The evening light in Rabat falls softly on old walls and new conversations, and the work of renewal goes on. Madagascar, that great island off the southeast coast of Africa, has become the third country on the continent to test direct-to-cell satellite technology. It's a small sentence, but it carries a quiet weight. For a place where so many communities sit far from paved roads and fiber lines, the idea that a phone in your pocket might reach a satellite overhead, without special equipment, without a new device, is not a small thing. The trial is being run by Airtel, working to link ordinary mobile phones directly to satellites in orbit. No dish on the roof. No tower on the hill, just the phone you already have, looking up instead of across. Madagascar follows two other African nations into this territory, and the path each one takes will be watched closely. Connectivity in places like this isn't only about convenience. It's about a clinic calling for supplies, a family hearing news, a farmer checking a price before the market closes. The technology is still in its testing days. It will take time and patience before anyone knows what it can reliably do. But there's something hopeful in the thought that over this large and varied island, where the land has always made connection difficult, something in the sky might help close the gap. And if you're still with me, that's where Madagascar rests tonight, looking up and waiting to see what answers back. Turkmenistan, in these first months of the year, has drawn 39.1 billion cubic meters of natural gas from beneath its plains. That figure, confirmed across industry reports, marks a slight rise over the same period a year before. For a country where gas is not just an industry but a foundation, even a small upward step carries weight. Turkmenistan sits on some of the largest natural gas reserves in the world. The fuel moves through pipelines to neighboring countries and beyond, quietly powering cities and industries far from where it was drawn. The work of extraction is steady and unglamorous. Drilling rigs turning, wells maintained, infrastructure kept ready for the seasons ahead. Reports note that further drilling is expected by year's end, a sign that the rhythm of production continues its familiar pace. What makes this worth carrying into the night is not the number itself, but what it represents. A country quietly doing what it has long done, providing energy to places it will never see. The gas flows out, the rigs keep turning, and somewhere a kitchen light stays on because of it. If you're still with me, let that settle for a moment. A vast, patient land, giving up its warmth 1 cubic meter at a time. Bahrain is a small island kingdom in the Gulf, and these days its nights have been broken by the sound of sirens. The Interior Ministry confirmed that air raid warnings sounded across the country as Iran launched a barrage of missiles and drones. For anyone living there, that sound carries a particular weight. Bahrain sits within easy reach of Iran across the Gulf, and it hosts an American military presence, the kind of presence that makes it a target when regional tensions flare. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has claimed responsibility for striking American assets at bases in Bahrain and neighboring Kuwait, part of a wider wave of attacks that also reached Jordan and the Strait of Hormuz. Whether those claims hold up in full is not yet clear. What is clear is that the sirens were real, and that families across Bahrain heard them. This is not an unfamiliar position for the island. Bahrain has long navigated a difficult geography, close to Iran, aligned with the West and its Gulf neighbors. Not long ago, a court there sentenced 3 people to life in prison for ties to the IRGC, a reminder of how deep those anxieties run. Tonight, the sirens have gone quiet, but the quiet itself feels fragile, and the people of Bahrain know that better than most. Romania has received word from Brussels that the European Commission has approved the 3rd renegotiation of its National Recovery and Resilience Plan, the framework that guides how EU recovery funds flow into the country. These plans, if you recall, were drawn up across the European Union in the wake of the pandemic. Each member state set its own priorities for rebuilding and modernizing. But circumstances change. Costs shift, timelines slip, governments adjust. What looked right on paper a year or 2 ago may need a second look, or in Romania's case, a third. The country's EU investments minister confirmed the approval, which means the revised plan can now proceed. The real work, of course, always lies ahead, in the slow business of turning approved proposals into finished projects, real infrastructure, tangible change. For most Romanians, this kind of news passes quietly. It belongs to the machinery of European cooperation. Revisions, approvals, the careful language of communiques, but there's something worth noticing in it. a country willing to revisit its plans, to adapt, to stay in steady conversation with its partners rather than clinging to a blueprint that no longer quite fits. And in that willingness to adjust, there's a kind of patience, the understanding that good plans, like good neighbors, sometimes benefit from a second look and a third. Nepal has been drawing more of the world's money lately. Foreign equity investment inflow has more than doubled. That's the word from Xinhua. And while the details behind the number are still coming in, the shape of the story is clear. Capital from outside the country is arriving at roughly twice the pace it had been. For a nation tucked between India and China, two of the largest economies on Earth, that kind of attention carries weight. It suggests investors are looking past the familiar images of Nepal, the peaks, the trails, the temples, and seeing something more practical. A market, a place where things can be built. We don't yet know which sectors drew the most interest or which countries sent the funds, but the direction matters. When foreign equity rises like this, it can mean construction, jobs, new enterprises in towns that have waited a long time for them. It can also mean change arriving from outside, with all the complexity that brings. How that balance settles is a story still unfolding. For now, the figure stands on its own, doubled, and still growing into its meaning. Somewhere in Kathmandu, or in a valley town where the evening settles over the hills, that number is less a statistic than a quiet signal. The world, it seems, is leaning in. Honduras is doing something this week that might sound technical, but is really about a country taking care of its own house. The government has launched a bond buyback, an offer to purchase some of its existing notes from the people who hold them. Think of it as refinancing, settling old debts on better terms, and looking toward borrowing fresh money under conditions that suit you better. Alongside the buyback, Honduras is signaling it wants to sell new global debt, offering fresh bonds to international investors. For a Central American nation, these moves matter. They're a way of managing obligations, keeping confidence steady, and arranging finances so there's room to plan ahead. Tegucigalpa, the capital, sits up in the hills, and from there the work of managing the country's debt goes forward, the kind of thing governments everywhere do when they can. Bond markets can feel distant from daily life, but they touch everything a state touches. Roads, schools, the quiet infrastructure that holds a country together. What stands out is the ordinariness of it, in the best sense. Honduras making measured financial moves on its own schedule is the kind of thing that doesn't make much noise. It just keeps things going. And sometimes that's the steadiest story of all, a country tending to its affairs, quietly, while the rest of the world turns. Vanuatu is a string of more than 80 islands scattered across the South Pacific, and reaching a clinic on one of the more remote ones can mean a journey by boat that takes days. So when word comes of a drone project designed to strengthen healthcare and disaster response across the country, it carries a particular kind of promise. The idea is straightforward enough: unmanned aircraft carrying medical supplies and emergency aid between islands that have always been separated by open water. For a nation that sits in the Pacific cyclone belt, where a single storm can cut off communities for weeks, the ability to move critical supplies through the air rather than across rough seas could change how people weather the worst seasons. And for everyday healthcare, a vaccine, a laboratory sample that needs to reach a hospital on another island, it could mean the difference between waiting and receiving care in time. The project is still taking shape, but the ambition behind it is clear: to use technology not for speed alone, but for closeness, for bridging the distances that geography insists on. There's something quietly hopeful about that. Picture those small aircraft lifting off from a coastal village, rising above the palms, heading out over the blue water toward another island where someone is waiting. The night here is gentle, and the sea between the islands is calm. Iraq is looking toward the end of a long foreign military presence. Prime Minister al-Zaidi has said that all American forces will withdraw from the country by September 30th, closing a chapter that began more than 20 years ago. The announcement came during a visit to the White House, where al-Zaidi met with President Trump. The two leaders spoke warmly of their meeting, with Trump describing what he called tremendous chemistry and promising a lot of deals between the two nations. He also spoke of oil, of taking a lot of it out of Iraq, though the details of those arrangements remain to be seen. For Iraq, this moment carries layers of meaning. The American military presence there stretches back over 2 decades, through invasion, occupation, insurgency, and the slow, painful work of rebuilding. To say the relationship between Baghdad and Washington has been complicated would be understating it considerably. Now al-Zaidi's government faces the question of what comes next, not only in its dealings with the United States, but in balancing the influences that press on Iraq from all sides. There is Iran, whose reach into Iraqi politics and security has long been a fact of life. There is the matter of sovereignty itself, what it means in practice and not just in speeches. If you are still with me, consider what it means for a country to reclaim the full footprint of its own soil. After 23 years, a date has been set, and then Iraq will stand in a way it has not for a generation on its own ground. Tajikistan and its neighbor Kyrgyzstan have begun a quiet, deliberate task along the rugged spine of Central Asia. They are placing their very first border markers, for two countries whose shared boundary has long been a source of tension and sorrow. These simple posts are a profound gesture. The land here is beautiful and difficult, winding through the high peaks of the Pamir and Alay Mountains. For years, the lack of a clear line brought uncertainty to the people living in those valleys, leaving communities in a state of limbo. Now, the work of demarcation is moving forward. Surveyors and officials from both sides are walking the terrain together, installing the physical markers and border posts that will eventually map out a formal boundary. It is a slow process measured in careful steps rather than sweeping declarations, but there is a deep significance in this steady progress. When the map is finally settled, families and communities living near the line will know exactly where they stand. It brings a kind of stillness to the region, replacing old anxieties with the ordinary, unhurried rhythms of daily life. If you are still with me, consider the weight of a single marker on a windswept hillside. It is a small thing, made of metal or stone, yet it holds the quiet promise of a peaceful frontier. As the evening settles over the mountains of Tajikistan, the work continues, one post at a time, drawing a line that is meant not to divide, but to bring calm. Palestine holds a difficult place in the world's attention these days, and the stories from Gaza rarely ease. The World Food Programme has been keeping watch through its emergency response. Its latest situation report covers the month of June, a quiet accounting of a place where quiet has become scarce. The report sits among other fragments of news. Hospitals struck, children hurt, a week described by Al Jazeera as bloody. These are not new sorrows in Gaza, but they have not stopped being sorrows. The WFP's work is the work of measuring need and trying to meet it, food where food can reach, aid where corridors stay open. In a place where infrastructure has been battered and movement is uncertain, even that simple act of bringing sustenance becomes complicated, sometimes impossible. Around the world, Palestine surfaces in other conversations too, a vote by the Church of England on Cairo's Palestine, welcomed by Palestinian churches. A benefit concert in Detroit raising funds for prosthetics. A debate over whether the word Palestine belongs on a museum wall in London. Each is a small echo, carried outward from a place where the original sound is still ongoing. If you're still with me, hold Gaza gently tonight. The reports will continue, the need continues. And somewhere, people are still trying to reach families who are waiting. Lebanon has sent negotiators to Rome, where, with American help, they've been sitting across from Israeli counterparts to talk about turning a framework agreement into something real. The framework exists. What it doesn't yet have, by Lebanon's deputy prime minister's own account, is a timeline, specifically, a timeline for the withdrawal of forces. That gap between having a deal on paper and knowing when it takes shape on the ground is where these talks live. There's added pressure from an unexpected quarter. Reports this week describe a phone call in which Donald Trump told Benjamin Netanyahu to pull Israeli troops out of Syria and Lebanon. Whether that shifts the calculus in Rome is anyone's guess, but it adds a new voice to a conversation that has long had too few. The backdrop is fragile. A broader truce in the region has been fraying even as these particular talks move forward. So the work in Rome is both hopeful and urgent, an attempt to keep one thread steady while others come loose. For people in Lebanon, the question is simple and difficult. When will foreign presence end, and what comes after? The negotiators are asking it in rooms with heavy doors and interpreters. Families are asking it closer to home. And the answer, for now, is still being written. Carefully, slowly, in a city far from either capital. Malawi has been quietly building something many of us take for granted, a way to prove who you are. The country has now issued some 13.5 million digital identity cards, and with that, the idea of universal coverage no longer feels distant. It's coming into view. A digital ID sounds technical, perhaps dry. But in practice, it's the difference between being seen and being overlooked. It opens doors to banking, to healthcare, to voting, to school enrollment, to the ordinary machinery of civic life that requires you to exist on paper before you can participate. There's a particular dignity in being counted. In many parts of the world, the people most likely to lack ID are those who already sit at the edges: rural communities, women, the poor. A national push like this one, moving steadily toward everyone, is quietly redistributive in that way. It says, you belong here on the record. Malawi's journey toward this point hasn't been loud. It's been the work of registration drives, of biometric systems, of offices reaching into districts far from the capital. And now, with 13.5 million people holding a recognized identity, the remaining gap, the last stretch before universal coverage, is narrowing. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. A country where soon, everyone will be able to say their name and have it recognized. It's a quiet kind of progress, the kind that holds everything else up. Peru has lived through a long stretch of political turbulence these past years, leaders rising and falling, institutions tested, citizens weary of the churn. And into that restless landscape, the name Fujimori carries a particular weight. It belongs to a family that has shaped Peru's modern story in ways both proud and painful. And the challenge now, as observers frame it, is whether that political force can help break the cycle of instability rather than deepen it. It's worth remembering what Peru is, beyond the political headlines. A country of extraordinary depth, ancient cities in the clouds, Amazon rivers that never sleep, coastal deserts that hold the fog close. Its people have weathered political crisis after crisis with patience and a stubborn sense of who they are. Calm, steady governance is not too much to hope for. Whether the path forward runs through the Fujimori movement or somewhere else entirely, the question stays the same. Can Peru find its footing, govern itself without lurching from one emergency to the next? These are the kinds of nights when that question feels especially open, not answered, not resolved, but still being asked by people who care deeply about what comes next. And that, perhaps, is where steadier ground begins. Indonesia has received a quiet vote of confidence from the financial world this week, and it comes at a moment when that confidence has been tested. The ratings agency S&P has maintained the country's credit rating, suggesting that the fiscal pressures Indonesia has been feeling may be temporary rather than something more lasting. It's a measured judgment, not a celebration, but in the language of global finance, holding steady is its own kind of reassurance. The context matters here. Indonesia has been navigating a stretch of economic uncertainty, with questions about investor confidence surfacing in recent months and reforms underway in the mining sector aimed at making the country more attractive to outside capital. There have been strains on public spending too, including adjustments to a free meals program that left some kitchen operators uncertain about what comes next. So when S&P looks at all of that and says the strain looks temporary, it's offering a perspective that looks past the immediate friction towards something more durable. Indonesia is Southeast Asia's largest economy, a vast archipelago of more than 270 million people, and the rhythms of its fiscal life rarely move in straight lines. Credit ratings can feel abstract, far from daily life. But they shape what a country can borrow, and at what cost, and that eventually touches everything from infrastructure to the price of goods at the market. For now, the ledger holds, and the quiet message underneath is patience. In the Republic of the Congo, deep within the Congo Basin, there are lakes that seem to breathe, not the way a living thing breathes. These waters release ancient carbon, drawn from stores locked away long ago into the air above. It's a discovery that has surprised researchers working in one of the planet's great tropical forest regions, a place already known for holding immense amounts of carbon in its trees and soils. The Congo Basin stretches across Central Africa, and the Republic of the Congo holds a significant portion of it, a landscape of slow rivers, dense forest, and quiet water, where the ground itself seems to keep its own time. These lakes, it turns out, have been doing something scientists hadn't fully accounted for. They've been cycling carbon that may have been hidden for ages, releasing it in ways only now coming to light. What this means for the wider picture isn't yet clear. The scope, the mechanisms, the implications, all of it is still being studied. But the discovery is a quiet reminder that the Earth's systems are still full of surprises, even in places we think we know. For the people who live near these forests and waterways, the lakes have always been there. It's the rest of us who are only now learning what they've been quietly doing, season after season, in the warm dark of the basin. Panama has been quietly rethinking how it keeps the lights on. The country has reconfirmed 2 energy tenders aimed at 2027, and this time there's something new in the mix. Battery energy storage systems, known as BESS, are being treated as a priority. That's a meaningful shift for a nation that has long depended on hydropower and, increasingly, on wind and sun. The trouble with renewable energy has always been its timing. The wind doesn't always blow. The clouds roll in, and the power fades just when people need it most. Battery storage changes that equation. It lets you hold on to the energy you generate during the bright, breezy hours and release it later when the evening demand arrives. For Panama, which sits between 2 oceans and feels the rhythms of both, this is a practical question as much as an environmental one. The grid has to be steady. The tenders for 2027 suggest that planners are looking ahead, not just to more generation, but to smarter ways of keeping what they already produce. There aren't many details yet. The announcement is more confirmation than blueprint, but the direction is clear. A small country thinking about how to store its own power so that the energy it harvests today can still be working for it tonight. And if you're still with me, that's a quiet kind of foresight worth sitting with for a moment. Grenada, like its neighbors in the Eastern Caribbean, is preparing for a quiet but meaningful change in everyday life. The Eastern Caribbean Central Bank has announced that new banknotes will replace the current ones, which carry the image of Britain's Queen Elizabeth. For decades, that portrait has traveled through hands and markets and pockets across the region, a remnant of a colonial relationship that for most of these nations formally ended long ago. The new notes will mark a shift, small in one sense, but unmistakable in another. Money is something people touch every day, and what it carries on its face says something about who a place considers itself to be. Grenada has been independent since 1974, and it shares its currency, the Eastern Caribbean dollar, with 7 other nations, from St. Kitts and Nevis down to Dominica and St. Vincent. What the new designs will look like hasn't been detailed yet, but the decision itself speaks to a region gradually reshaping its symbols to match its own story. There's no rush here, no sudden rupture. The old notes will circulate for a while, and the new ones will ease in alongside them, the way tides shift along Grenada's southern coast. If you're still with me, just hold that image for a moment, a country reaching into its wallet and finding, where a foreign monarch once sat, something that belongs to the islands themselves. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.